All right, so before we do anything else, let's open with prayer. Please join me. Gracious, loving God, we are grateful for the ways that you equip us for ministry, and that each person, each and every person has been given gifts and talents by you for bettering this world, for lifting one another up. Thank you that you call apostles and teachers and elders and deacons and ministers and people who will take care of the details and people who will dream big. You've created this breadth of ability, and it is such a gift. Help us as we either resource nominating committees or serve on nominating committees. Help us keep in mind that breadth of talent, the depth of gifts that you have provided, and help us always to be asking the question, how is God calling me? How is God calling you? How is God calling us together to be at work in the body of Christ? So be with us in this time as we explore what that looks like in our polity, and be with us as we seek to be faithful. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I will share my screen. And so you should see my big white box that says Congregation Nominating Committees. So we're going to do two things in our time tonight. We are going to look first at the Book of Order requirements. What does our governance, our Constitution say? But then I'm going to spend a little time offering my own helpful tips. These are things Cindy thinks are important to know. But let's start with the Book of Order. So that's primary. So Book of Order in our G section, which is the form of government, in the second chapter, there's a fairly lengthy paragraph on the election of ruling elders and deacons. So here you go. Ruling elders and deacons are people elected by the congregation from among its members. So there's the first thing. Members. You have to be a member to be elected as an elder or deacon or trustee if you have a separate board of trustees. Membership at the church and that particular church is required. It's not enough to be a member of another Presbyterian church. To be elected to service in a particular church, you have to be a member of that particular church. And that nomination and election shall express the rich diversity of the congregation's membership and shall guarantee participation and inclusiveness. And just as a reminder, when we see shall in the Book of Order, it is the must. It is you have to do this. Sometimes we still don't rise to that level of ability, but in this case, these shalls are important, that we want in our leadership, in elders, deacons, if you have a board of deacons, trustees, if you have trustees, we want those groups to indeed reflect the diversity of the congregation. Because if they don't, the church is not being led by the whole body. It's just a small part of the body. And it's important to guarantee participation, that there are ways for those who are elected to participate in the work of the session or the board of deacons. We're going to step away from the form of government paragraph here and look at what F, the foundations, says about inclusiveness. So that's next. The paragraph that is cited is this one, calling for unity and diversity. The unity of believers in Christ is reflected in the rich diversity of the church's membership. And so in Christ, by the power of the Spirit, God unites persons through baptism, regardless of anything. I mean, we keep adding to this list to make sure it means anything, but it really means anything. Everyone who has been baptized and is a member of the church is included in the body. And therefore, there's no place in the life of the church for discrimination. And this is where we shall guarantee full participation and representation in worship, governance, and emerging life to all persons or groups. So this is the reminder. And we'll get into this under my helpful tints, but when I was serving in my first call, I had one particular elder really push back that people had to be a certain age in order to be elected as an elder, because elder means old. He didn't use those exact words, but that's what he meant. And I said, no, that has nothing to do with the ability to be part of the leadership of the church. Age is one piece of life, but it's not even the most important piece of life. Call, faith, wisdom, understanding. We see those things across age groups. And sometimes age is not a predictor in those things. So for our nominating committees to not automatically say that person can't, or that person isn't a good fit, or that person doesn't have what it takes. The first step of discernment is discerning who might be called to serve as a ruling elder, a position of leadership and guidance, or serve as a deacon in the caring ministries of the church. If we start there, then we can look at the breadth of talent and ability within the church, potentially with new eyes. So back to the form of government, to the long paragraph. So in order to be elected as an elder or deacon, there's a nominating committee. You know, we do things decently and in order. And these are the guidelines for that nominating committee. It's a nominating committee elected by the congregation. So every member of the nominating committee is elected by the congregation, regardless of the elder who is filling the required slot that we'll look at in a minute. That person is also elected to the nominating committee. So the nominating committee, all the members are elected by the congregation. And it also, just like those who are being elected, the nominating committee should also be drawn from and representative of the membership of the church. So again, this is not a place where we only look for people who have been members for at least 20 years. That doesn't mean anything. Who has a prayerful life? Who is willing to talk to people about their sense of call within the church? Who is willing to make the contact? Very important piece. As we were looking for people to serve at the presbytery level on our nominating committee, one of the people we reached out to said, I'm happy to be on the committee, but I won't make any phone calls. So we said, thank you. Thank you for being honest. We don't feel God's calling you to serve in this capacity right now. Because making those contacts is an essential part of the work of the nominating committee. So this next sentence, congregations may provide by their own rule for a congregational nominating committee, points to what our bylaws should include. And so each congregation's bylaws should have some language about how nominating committees for the congregation are formed. That can include a range of number. The nominating committee shall be no fewer than 3 and no more than 6, depending on the size of the congregation. It can include some other guidelines as long as they're not in conflict with this paragraph in the Book of Order. So that's one of the pieces that our bylaws should include. And if you're curious about that, that was April's leadership training about bylaws and what needs to be included. So you can look back at that. But here are the key pieces that are required. Minimum size of the committee shall be at least 3 persons. And that's where having that language of no fewer than, no more than gives you some flexibility, especially as congregations go through their own seasons. But no fewer than 3 people. The second requirement, at least 1 member of the committee shall be an elder currently serving on session. So that's a shall. So 1 member of session has to serve on the nominating committee. Now, you may notice it does not specify that that person has to chair the committee. That is often the practice, and some churches specify that in the bylaws, that an active member of session will chair the nominating committee, but it's not required. So again, if someone has good leadership skills, good moderating skills, that person can be a good choice to moderate the nominating committee. It's not required that it be any particular person. Something that I've seen in the churches I've served is that the elder that serves on the nominating committee is often an elder whose term is ending. So that elder usually is in their 3rd year, or maybe in their 2nd term and in their 6th year. That has some wisdom to it, but again, it's not required. If your bylaws specify that, then you have guidance there. But some of the wisdom is if that person is rotating off, they might or should have an idea of what gifts and skills are needed in leadership for the church in this particular time and place. But again, there's no directive language, only that an elder currently serving on session shall be one of the people elected to the committee. And then the third requirement for the makeup of the committee is that a majority of those persons on the committee who are eligible to vote shall consist of persons not currently serving on session. So you could have more than 1 current session member serving on the nominating committee, but that would increase the number of other people drawn from the congregation, nominated from the congregation, to create that balance. There has to be a majority of people from the congregation serving on the nominating committee. Now, one church I recently spoke with assigns 2 elders, 1 deacon, and 1 trustee. So that's 4 people coming in from active service. The Book of Order here is silent on deacons and trustees and whether having those members then increases the number of members from the congregation. My opinion is that the intention here is truly that the voice of the congregation be heard. And so if the nominating committee includes people who are currently serving in other capacities, like a board of deacons or a board of trustees, I would recommend increasing the number of people drawn from the congregation so that you have that majority. In that particular church's structure, they had 4 people, 2 elders, 1 deacon, 1 trustee, and I recommended that they elect in addition, 5 members of the congregation. That's a really big nominating committee. That 9 people can be a challenge in terms of meetings and getting input from everybody. But my sense is that's the spirit of what is here and is something to keep in mind. And then the last piece of detail is that the pastor shall serve ex officio without vote. The pastor is a part of the process. And that's for a few reasons. The pastor often knows details about people's lives that are not public. And so sometimes the pastor can rightfully say, this isn't a good time to ask Jane to serve on this committee. The pastor hopefully also knows about some of the surprising gifts and skills of members of the congregation. So the pastor can also say, wait, have you thought about Andy for this position? I've seen Andy lead in this way, or I've seen Carrie offer care in this way. And so the pastor can be one of those bridges with some deeper knowledge of members, both abilities, but also the current challenges. The pastor does not have a vote. So while the pastor may say, I don't know if we need to ask John to serve again. He missed a lot of meetings, and when he was president, he didn't seem engaged in the conversation. The pastor can offer that, but it's the nominating committee who makes the decision who to approach and who to nominate for these roles of leadership in the church. So any questions at this point before we go into some more of my helpful tips? I've been sprinkling them in. Any questions? And Nancy, you're muted, so.
Maybe it just applies to mine. Now, well, if I think of it, I'll ask later. I had questions as I was going, and now I'm going blank.
That's okay. We're going to have time at the end as well.
I know one thing. I guess one of my comments is I was told by people who have served previously on the nominating committee at our church that often what happens is when the nominating committee meets, everybody's been already asked and everything's been settled, and they are just coming together to kind of affirm this, that people have been asked and they have agreed to serve. And also, I have not always been told when the meetings are.
And that is a common point of tension. There are churches that feel like they need to have secret conversations or private conversations, but the pastor is an ex officio member. To the first, though, it is the work of the committee to discern who to ask. And one of the reasons I wanted to offer this particular training on nominating committees is I do hear of some of the practices that have lost sight of the purpose. So my understanding and the way that I operate is if the nominating committee has not met and consulted within themselves and agreed together to ask somebody to serve that is an inappropriate invitation. That until the nominating committee votes to make the invitation. Now, that doesn't preclude potentially somebody feeling somebody out, going up to somebody and say, hey, I'm serving on the nominating committee. I'd really like to bring your name as a possible elder or deacon. Could I have your permission to do that? That's a little, that can be dangerous because it may imply that therefore you will be nominated. But I could see that reasoning. Mm-hmm. Still, it is the work of the committee, and the committee should meet and discuss any names before anyone is approached. And that includes people who are eligible for second term. It should not be assumed that just because you're eligible for an additional term means that you will automatically be elected or nominated to serve again. Sometimes people's lives change, and so the time and the ability to focus on the ministry isn't there. Sometimes people have different gifts and skills, and it's not a good fit for their call, and that's okay. At the presbytery level, when I work with our nominating committee, I advise them, before you approach anyone who may be eligible for a second term, please talk to the chair of the committee. Get some feedback. Has this person been able to participate in helpful and meaningful ways in the work of this committee? And if the answer is no, then I advise that person should be thanked for their willingness to serve and the time they've given, but not be approached for a second term. Yeah, and so that is part of the committee's work, to discern that, sometimes to make some hard decisions, but to decide together who to approach.
Okay.
Oh, there's one more piece. See, this is a really long paragraph. And so you've probably seen this happen when elections are held. Full opportunity shall, there's that word again, always be given to the congregation for nomination from the floor of the congregational meeting by any active member of the congregation. So we provide that opportunity at presbytery meetings. Are there any nominations from the floor? We are required to provide that at congregational meetings. The person, this is practice, it's not required here. The person who is maybe nominated from the floor should be present to affirm a willingness to serve. If the person's not present, that's tricky. So that's a piece you could include in your bylaws. It's not specified in the Book of Order, but in your bylaws, you could specify that a person nominated from the floor during a congregational meeting must be present to speak to that nomination. That would be an appropriate rule to include in your bylaws. If you are in a position where you have a full slate, so you have someone nominated for every opening and there's a nomination from the floor, then you go to ballots is the best way to do it, especially in a congregational setting. Hopefully, there's an awareness ahead of time. Hopefully, this isn't a surprise. But if it is a surprise, the best way to move forward is to have a ballot and ask people to write down the names of those that they are electing to the elders, to the session. So if if the person is being nominated to fill a slot for the session and the nominating committee also has a full slate, then people are invited to write no more than the number of openings on a ballot. And those are tabulated by members of the nominating committee. I hope that doesn't happen. One of the churches I served, somebody was angry that they were not invited for a second term, even though they were not a helpful member of the session. They weren't a helpful member of the session. And so that person arranged to be nominated from the floor, and it resulted in a pretty ugly fight. Doesn't have to be that way. But it can be difficult. And then this last piece of guidance, a majority of all active members present and voting. That's really important. So you may have a membership roll of 150 of active members, but regularly have 40 to 50 people actually present in worship. So it's a majority of the active members present, not the majority of active members on the roll. So that's an important distinction, because if it was a majority of active members on the roll and you only had 50 members in worship and your roll was 150, you would need at least another 26 people, 26 members to be present for that election to be valid. That's not what's required. Thanks be to God. So members active members who are present. And so if somebody challenges it, says, I wasn't there, this is a good piece of information to have at your fingertips. So you ready for my helpful tips? All right. These come out of my own experience as a pastor and as a presbytery leader. No thank you is a fully appropriate response when someone volunteers to serve. We often have people volunteer to serve at the congregation level, at the presbytery level. And their gifts and skills are not the gifts and skills that are needed for this time. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. But saying no is okay. Just because someone volunteers to serve, the nominating committee is not obligated to therefore nominate that person. That, again, is part of that discernment. It's part of that prayerful discernment about who God is calling to serve right now. The flip side of that, no thank you, is also an appropriate response from someone who has been asked to serve. There is the hesitant, I'm not sure, I'm up for it, I don't know if I'm the right person. There's that response, and that it's okay in that case to say, well, here are the gifts I see, and here are the reasons I think it'd be great to have you in this position. But the person who says, I can't do it, I can't do it right now, pressuring that person can be harmful. If they're honestly saying, I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the time, I can't do it right now, accepting that and saying, I want you to know that we see your gifts and abilities and we affirm them. And we also appreciate your ability to set good boundaries. So, no is fine. It's a good answer. And it doesn't have to mean something's wrong. It may just be the honest, I'm at the limit of what I can encompass in my life right now. Here's where I get to be really blunt. Electing the same people over and over again is a bad idea. It is a bad idea. It is not good for the church's health. It does not support the church's long-term vitality. It does not lead to deeper faithfulness. And my experience is electing the same people over and over again creates an echo chamber. And so you are no longer hearing the voice of the whole congregation. You're hearing the voice of the people who are on the inside and have been on the inside for years, if not decades. I know people will argue, well, you know, the breadth of experience, the wisdom gained from years of service. Sure. But God is always doing something new. And if we are unable to identify and raise up new leadership in the church, it's a sign of distress. It's not a sign of health. So I encourage, I push, if a nominating committee reverts to the easy names and the easy answers, I'll push hard on that. Is that person really the one that is best equipped in this time and place? Is this the person God is intending to be in leadership, to be part of our caring ministries? Isn't there someone else? Sometimes you do elect people again because of their gifts and skills, because there is a sense that they are bringing something that is important to the life and ministry of the congregation. That is an authentic reason. Just because they did it before is not.
Can I ask a quick question?
Definitely.
When you're talking about electing the same people over and over, are we talking about electing them to the nominating committee or electing them to, say, the session or the deacons?
Yes.
Okay, as I was asking that, that's what I was thinking, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if we elect the same people over and over again, then we're creating, we're creating something that continues in the same patterns. And I saw, Linda, your question in the chat. How can the nominating committee say no thank you if someone is nominated from the floor during the congregational meeting? Yeah, that's hard. There may be the space to say, the reason that we're presenting this slate of people is we feel through our prayerful discernment that these are the best, that these are the people God is calling to leadership at this time. But a lot depends on the context. Yeah, sorry, a lot depends on the context and whether or not there's a willingness to challenge that nomination from the floor. Sometimes it's a good nomination. Sometimes it's somebody who was overlooked or thought they couldn't and now they could. And sometimes it's the person that you had prayerfully decided was not being called right now. And that's just really hard. And at that point, it is the congregation's decision. The nominating committee at that point, other than advising the congregation, this is why we've made these decisions, this is why we've invited these people. It's up to the congregation to say no, thank you. Yeah. May you never have that experience. So my next little helpful tip, and you've already heard me say this. You've heard me say this. I will beat this drum until it can't make a sound anymore. The primary task of the nominating committee is to prayerfully discern. What are the needs of the mission and ministry of the congregation? What are the skills and talents of the members who could lead the congregation to deeper faithfulness? It's not a question of who has the time. It's not a question of who has the money. And I know that sometimes that has been a factor. And I understand that there are not-for-profit boards who do indeed nominate people to serve on the board because they have financial wherewithal to support the mission and ministry of that nonprofit. That's not how the church works. We don't nominate people to service based on their financial abilities. And so that may be one of the shifts for people who come to the work of a nominating committee with a different mindset, with the mindset from a corporate world, a corporate background, an educational background, a nonprofit background, that this is different. This is not the trustees of a school who are expected to raise money. These are people being nominated and elected to help us follow Jesus better. And so that's a different mindset. As the nominating committee does their work, they really need to have a clear and honest understanding of the commitment involved in serving the congregation as an elder, deacon, or trustee. It is not fair to say, well, the meetings aren't that bad. They're only once a month, and to gloss over, and you'll be expected to help lead in worship, and you'll be expected to be elder of the month. Some congregations do that, and you'll be expected to go with the pastor if there's communion for those unable to come to worship or to do pastoral care calls. You need to be honest, and be honest if there's some challenges. It's going to be a hard season for the church. We think you have the gifts and skills to help lead us through this season, but don't say, oh, no, it's easy, if it's not going to be easy. If the committee, if the session or the board of deacons has a set meeting day and time, and it is non-negotiable, like it will always be the second Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. You need to be able to communicate that. If there's an openness, if the congregational culture is that the meeting times adjust based on the newly formed session or board of deacons, awesome. Then you can say there's the ability to find a time that works well for everyone. But a lot of churches have that set meeting day and time. And I've seen it again and again, someone who's nominated, and it doesn't work. So being able to have that information up front and being honest about it is really important for a nominating committee. And for those who are being asked to serve, just think about how awful it feels to be asked to serve without the full picture, with perhaps unintentional misinformation, or with that need, we have to fill the slot, so I'm not going to tell you that the meeting is at a time that's going to be hard for you. That hurts people. It feels bad. So having that honest information is really important. And if that means going to the deacons and say, tell us about your meeting culture, or going, if you have trustees, going to the trustees and saying, how firm are your meeting dates and times? That's important work to do. It's worth doing. All right, second page of helpful tips. Woo! Only 2 pages of helpful tips. I restrained myself a little bit. So healthy churches invite new members into leadership. They're constantly encouraging leadership skills throughout the congregation. And this is how so many people understand a call to ministry later in their lives, they begin by being asked to serve as an elder or deacon. And that sparks something and develops something that had been waiting for the opportunity. As we looked at the paragraph from the foundations section, there's no barrier to service other than active membership and the ability to be present and participate in the work. So you can draw a larger circle than most nominating committees often do. There's no minimum age. There's not a magic age of majority in the church. There may be an age in terms of voting on property issues that is set by the state where the church is incorporated, but that doesn't mean you can't have an elder who's 16 or a deacon who's a teenager. Younger might be hard because still you need them to be able to participate in the work, in the meetings, in the ministry of that group, session, board of deacons. There's also no maximum age. Sometimes people, as they get older, have less energy. You may remember that when we ordain, one of the ordination questions is, will you seek to serve the people with energy, intelligence, imagination, and love? And sometimes we get tired and we don't have the energy. The intelligence, imagination, love may be fine, but we don't have the energy. But I know so many adults who are in their 70s and 80s who are spry and sharp and passionate about the church and have a love for Jesus and want the church to be engaged with their neighbors. There's no maximum age either. So again, draw that circle wide. I have more than once had a young adult, a teenager on session who has shifted the conversation in ways that changed the directory of the church for the better. So I encourage looking at young adults and high school students and junior high. If there is a young person who displays that early wisdom, who displays a willingness to sit in our meetings, consider them. This next one is one of my biggest pet peeves. Don't do it. And I hear nominating committees do it. I've sat in rooms where it's the conversation. Maybe if we ask so-and-so to be on session, he'll come back to church. There's a terrible reason to ask somebody to serve in leadership. Because to be able to serve in leadership, you have to be connected into the life, the worship, the ministry, the fellowship, the life of the congregation. Overwhelmingly, my experience, if this thinking prevails, is the person doesn't come to meetings, or if they come to meetings, they are out of touch with how the church has understood its call to be faithful. So don't do it. Just don't do it. Yeah, Nancy?
I have, in a sense, the opposite problem. We have a couple of deacons who don't come to church and don't Zoom in, but they're deacons. And one of them's the chairman of the deacon committee.
Yeah. And so that's actually my last helpful tip here. And it's something that we actually, at the presbytery level, we put it in our guidelines for commissioned ruling elders, that if you are a commissioned ruling elder, you may not serve on one of the boards of your church of membership. Because once you've been commissioned, we are assuming that you're preaching in other churches, you're moderating other sessions, that your ministry context has shifted away from your home church, your church of membership. And so serving on your session while your ministry context is shifted isn't helpful. And we had a couple of commission ruling elders who, after the policy was adopted, they did step down from serving. But the flip side is true. What Nancy just raised is also true. So if someone says yes or is currently serving and then consistently absent, if they are not involved in worship and fellowship and mission and ministry of the church, it is appropriate to have a conversation to discern their calling. This is another piece, excuse me, that you can put in your bylaws. You can specify in your bylaws that if someone misses a certain number of meetings, or is absent from the life of the church across a certain amount of time, then that person may be asked to resign and dismissed from the committee. It's actually a piece I'm going to be seeking to add to the presbytery's manual. I also understand that there are power dynamics. And I understand that these can be conversations and situations that are complicated and entangled with a lot of other dynamics and issues. But my rule of thumb really is, and it's an appropriate rule of thumb, if you are not able to participate in the life and ministry of the congregation, then it's not appropriate for you to be in a leadership role. Having said that, there are churches that have really intentionally adopted hybrid formats, hybrid worship, hybrid committee meetings, hybrid session, and other board meetings. And in those cases, if someone is participating in that hybrid format, so they may not be physically present, but they are present. They're present in worship. They're present in those times of fellowship. They're present for the online or hybrid Bible study. They're present in planning for mission and ministry. That's active membership. And some churches during the height of the pandemic, when all of our doors were closed, ended up receiving members who would never, or very unlikely, ever be able to physically step foot in the church. But it made sense for them to become members. Churches can provide for that active membership may not be physically participating, but it is still participation. And so if your church has the hybrid format, if your church provides for an expanded way to participate, and they're still not participating, that's worth a conversation. Is this your calling? Are you called to this? If you're called to this, we need you to live into that calling. And if you're not called to this right now, that's okay. It's all right. There's no judgment. But we need to shift so that our church can have the leadership and caring ministries that we have said we need. We've established that we need a session, we need a board of deacons. Yeah. All right. That presentation will be available on the website by Monday, because Donna takes Fridays off in the summer. Yay for her. But Monday, this recording and the PDF of all those slides will be available. In the meantime, other questions, other things that have come up? Oh, you're muted again.
Yeah, there are a number. My husband's sitting here and feeding me questions, but
I can ask him if that's easy.
Well, but some of it has to do with, is there, other than what we've done today, is there training for the nominating committee of how to interview, say, potential elders or deacons or even trustees?
Yeah.
And
I kick you up now. If you look at the requirements for a position in the book of order or scripture,
yeah,
do we train nominating committees that these are things you can look for? It's not that you were a manager at a pharmaceutical company. It's like things that don't come up, or hospitality. Are you welcoming people into there? You know, things like, do you able to teach? That doesn't mean a Sunday school class, but can you teach one other person what baptism is about or what the plan of salvation is? If you're not able to teach even one person, why are you on the elder committee?
Yeah.
You know, and what do you do if you have 2 open slots and you can only find a candidate that meets your qualifications for one? How do you report to the congregation that we would have to take a substandard candidate in plainer terms for this office?
So first of all,
okay, last one then.
Okay.
Churches typically have a development program. So who are my potential candidates for elder? And I want to, even before they're nominating, start developing them so that I can steer a nominating committee to say, look at these individuals.
Yeah, sure.
Elder training.
So first question was about training. Often the pastor will do some orientation and training for the nominating committee before they begin work. But I'm happy if there's an interest across the presbytery in kind of a presbytery-wide training for church nominating committees. You've gotten a taste of what I believe, and I would say it to them too. But if there's a sense that would be helpful at the presbytery level to provide a broader training, I'm happy to help do that. Second question, one of the things I recommend for our bylaws, for our congregations, is to set those ranges so that the session is no fewer than 3, you have to have 3, and no more than whatever size makes sense for your congregation. And so that means if there's only one person who the nominating committee wants to nominate for service, that's okay. You have a range and not a set number of slots. There are a lot of churches who have open positions because they can't find people. Either people aren't willing to serve, they don't have the gifts and skills that are needed at that time, they aren't able to be at the meetings at the time they're set. It is not unusual at all for a church to have openings on the various boards. It's okay. And then the last one, so I think this is a twofold question. I believe that we are always called to be developing. I mean, the process of discipleship in the church is about continuing to develop people so that we can each be fully the person God intends us to be. So that's leadership skills, that's biblical understanding, that's exercise of faith, that's learning how to love God and neighbor. And that's the ongoing work, I believe, of every congregation. Once some churches do it differently. Some churches, once the nominating committee has identified the slate, the ballot, At that point, some churches will do training and we'll have conversations. One of the pieces that is required is a book of order requirement, is that everyone being elected is examined by the session. So that is a book of order requirement, that there's training and an examination by the session as part of stepping into the role. Some churches do that before the election at the congregational level. So they do it after you've been identified as someone who will be nominated, before the congregation elects. Other churches wait until the congregation has elected and then go through training and examination. And that looks different. But usually it includes going through what the Book of Order says are the qualities and responsibilities for the roles. That sounds like it might be another training topic. Mm-hmm. We are at our hour. I am always happy to answer questions by email. If questions come up afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out. And in the meantime, I hope your nominating committees can learn how to be committees that pray without ceasing. We're all supposed to do it, but especially our nominating committees. So thanks for tuning in tonight, and many blessings on your evening and the rest of this month of June. So take care.